also witness the increasing engagement of the Naga women with the social and legal order. So this particular session will look at this intersection between, in one way, the Naga women writings, literary writings, and the increasing engagement with this social and legal order. So for this session, we have, it's going to be chaired by Dr. Ian Benny Humso Nainu, who is the principal in Baptist Theological College, Nagaland. And we have 6 speakers lined up for this particular session. So first, we have Jasmine Patton, who is teaching as an assistant professor in Gargi College, University of Delhi. Second, we have John Gaingamlung Gangmai, who's an assistant professor in Rajiv Gandhi University, Arunachal Pradesh. Third, we have Chumthunglo Yantang, who is a PhD scholar in JNU. And after which we'll have Ivy Roy Sarkar, who is a senior researcher in IIT Roorkee. And for the last speaker, we'll have Sujata Bura Gohen from IIT Guwahati. So, we have been allotted time from 2 to 3:30. So it's my request that all the speakers abide by the time limit that they have been given. And it's my request to the chairperson to also ensure that. So I now hand over the session to the chair, Dr. Ian Benny.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Nguru. And welcome to all the participants, and especially a huge welcome to the presenters. As it has been told by the session organizer, we have 3 actually very broad subjects during this session: gender, law, and social change. And you will see in the papers that the 3 may be closely or remotely related, or one of the papers will be an independent subject. But all of the 6 papers, at least the abstracts that I have read, are quite compelling. And I'm sure that all the participants this afternoon will benefit greatly from their presentations. So as the presenters have been introduced already, I will not do that again, but we will follow the order of the presentation according to the event flyer. And so I would like to give the time first to Ms. Nzamungi Jasmine Patton for Naga women's writing in the 21st century. Jasmine, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Eying Benny, and a very good afternoon to all of you. At the very outset, I would like to admit and inform the audience that this is not a formal academic paper, but rather a collection of ruminations and reflections that I've been making on the status of women in Naga society and the works authored by women writers in the recent past. This is a topic which is also very close to my heart as an educated Naga woman, and it's a thought that I have often contemplated on. So what I'm presenting today is a thought and a work in progress in a very rough and raw form, and I will be most happy to hear other observations and interventions as well. My paper will be oscillating between a journey to the past, and the role of women in traditional Naga life. And it will be moving on to have a close look at the present and the changing roles of women today with specific attention to writing. To start with, I want to quote American author Caroline C., who once said, quote, "Every word a woman writes changes the story of the world, revises the official version," unquote. Something to ponder upon. Why does the story change when a woman writes? Why is there a need to revise the official version? What is wrong with the official version? Many questions, not enough answers. Perhaps one of the responses can be culled from Urvashi Butalia, a very well-known feminist who started the publishing house Zuban and also co-founded Kali for Women,
Mr. Nguru?
and the first
All right.
Oh, okay, okay, it's
Sorry.
back. Okay. I think it's gone
If the
again.
network issue persists with a particular speaker, we can move on to the next speaker.
Oh,
I
I'm
request
sorry.
that
I'm
you-
sorry. Yeah. Can I
Okay,
be?
it's
Am I
back
heard
again.
now? I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yes, yes, you're back
Yes.
again.
Yes.
Please
So,
go ahead.
yeah, continuing further, I was citing from Urvashi Butalia. So she talks about how women's narrative are done differently. And continuing with the citation, she says these narratives have concerns of family and contain the violence and often the unheard narratives there are, and say things like sexual abuse or domestic abuse, which are left out in many narratives. So, in other words, when women write, they disrupt the established mold, the official histories in a sense, and challenges the harmony of gender definitions and stratifications, because when women write, they traverse the travails of entrapment, they represent and give voice to the margins, and they write the neglected aspects of tellers and telling. I'm in agreement with the publisher Lanusang Latsudir. In one of her interviews in the Times of India, she says that women write about lived experience. And I think that is really true because we observe and we write about the experiences that are around us, which can be from the emotional to the mental to the physical to the spiritual. So women that way are charting new territories of social and historic spaces. And I would like to take a quote from Namrata Pathak's editorial for Cafe Dicensus, which has been titled Women's Writing from Northeast India. And I quote, "Women writings interrogate the canonical text, elitist practices, and the heterosexist assumptions of culture," unquote. What then writing has become is that it has become an agency and a site of power for women. Women have realized the importance of putting their voice out to be heard and understood. Thus, it may not be wrong to say that women writers, and more so Naga writers, as I'll be coming to them in a bit, are set to revisit and rewrite history in some senses. Now, we all know that in the Western world and in academia, the wave of feminism and women's movement gained momentum around in the later part of the 18th century with some path-breaking works like Mary Wollstonecraft's Vindication of the Rights of a Woman, etc. Now, similarly, I have observed that a similar moment arose for Naga women writers by the second half of the 20th century in the aftermath of the Naga nationalistic movements and subsequently the opening of access women had to academic education. Along with that, Naga women were interacting with new cultures and newer knowledge systems, which had opened up their eyes to see the reality of their plight. With that newfound realization and empowerment, Naga women were now raising voices on the societal and political fronts. When we look at the development of writing in Nagaland, we can clearly see that women are occupying a vast terrain of the intellectual landscape in Nagaland. Interestingly, Naga society is a society where women have been denied political/slash public space for centuries. In fact, I'm sure that you're also all familiar very recently of the uproar, recent in a sense 2017, the uproar regarding the ULB elections in Nagaland, where talks were on for 33% reservation of seats for women in the local bodies. One of the, and one of the very instrumental dialogue initiators, even at that point of time, was a body of women. We can call them activists. We can also call them, civil society stakeholders, but the Naga Mothers Association, they were very instrumental, in fact, in talking about why it is necessary for women to contest and have representation. And the NMA has been one such vocal and strong voiced or organization that initiated a discourse on gender among the Nagas. This also, again, in a sense, reminds me of the 18th century England and the spa and salon culture, which was thriving slowly besides the more visible and enlightened coffee house and tea club culture. Just as men were sitting and meeting in the coffee houses and tea clubs to talk about business, politics, and all the important things, women were meeting in salons and spas to discuss issues of class, gender, and politics as well. These meetings, dialoguings, writings are all important because it changes the narrative of silence and oppression. In the last few decades, we have Naga women writers at the center writing on marriage, motherhood, about Naga women's negotiation with their sexuality, bodies, and power within the framework of patriarchy. They write about the oppression and injustices meted out to their gender. They do not fight with might or brawn, but with pen and word. These Naga women writers have retrieved and reclaimed their spaces, those where their very being was reduced to that of dispensable, forgettable characters. There are stories written by women on the troubled Naga past, Naga histories, folk tales, culture, tradition, language, etc. Some of these writings are outstanding and stellar. And the undeniable fact to note is that among Nagas, as with most of the Northeast writers, women seem to be leading the forge. We have very eminent writers and personalities like Istirin Kire, who is a recipient of various prestigious awards like the Hindu Prize for Literature, the Tata Literature Book of the Year, Bahal Sahitya Puraskar. We also have personalities like Tamsula Au, who is a Padma Shri awardee, Sahitya Academy Award, etc. We have Mona Lisa Changija, Nini Lungalung, Rita Croacha, Thea Keditse, Rentunglo Shitari, Avino Kire, and even our very respectable chair, Dr. Eying Beni Hunsoy. And these are few among the many women who have been writing books that talk about the Naga women experience amid the contemporary shifts. They are bold and courageous in documenting the gaps and making way for a new epoch. Historically speaking, much about the realities, discrimination, and struggles of women were unknown to the world, as in the words of Sandra Gilbert and Susan Gubar, who wrote the path breaking book, Mad Woman in the Attic. And they talk about how much of history and stories were written by men. And so perspectives and stories of women were expressed by men, the perpetuation of the stereotypes of women as an angel and a monster myth, these were also immortalized by the men, leaving no room for women to speak about their own individual experiences. And I am taking a direct citation from that book. A life of feminine submission, of contemplative purity, is a life of silence. A life that has no pen and no story, while a life of female rebellion, of significant action, is a life that must be silenced, a life whose monstrous pen tells a terrible story, unquote. So these lines, take us to rethink about how a woman's life is either one of silence as the angel figure or the life of the silence if proven as the latter. This is further complemented by Virginia Woolf's iconic lines from A Room of One's Own, and I quote, "For most of history, Anonymous was a woman." In the Naga situation, similarly, we have huge gaps and omissions. Viopu, in his Literary Cultures of India's Northeast, he writes, and I quote, "Although men and women both suffered untold miseries, but since most narratives have been written by men, women's perspective to the whole situation has not been heard, and thereby the invisibility of women in Naga history," unquote. Lucy, in fact, Professor Lucy Zehol, also in her book Women in Naga Society, observes that most of the ethnographic materials have been written by male scholars and administrators and therefore represent a male point of view. We're all familiar with the fact, even within the traditional Naga society, that tradition, culture, and history has always been structured from a very gendered, patriarchal, and patrilineal division. Everything from role.
Excuse me, Nzan, can I ask you to please wrap up?
Okay, all right. So then
Thank you.
okay, jumping ahead. So then since I'm running out of time, I'm going towards the end and I'm going to take direct citations from works done by Istirin Kire and Tamsula. In A Terrible Matriarchy by Istirin Kire, she represents the grandmother figure of Vibanyo as a matriarch who has internalized the values and gendered stereotypes that have been indoctrinated in her experience of being a girl, and she looks at the male as a valuable asset in the family. In turn, Vibanyo becomes a convenient extension of patriarchy and becomes complicit in the culture of patriarchy. Vibanyo believes that the station of life of a girl is the home, and girls were weak and not as good as boys. And her nemesis is her granddaughter, Dileno or Leno, who always questions the grandmother's harshness towards her just because she's a girl. Grandmother discourages her parents for sending her to school, unlike her four brothers, or even if she does attend, she does it after that extra mile of waking up early and finishing her chores. In one of the conversations, the mother tells Leno that it is because the grandmother has had a very deprived life since they could not, she and her sisters could not hold on to property as they were all, girls in the family. And it is at that moment that Leonor realizes, and I'm citing, that she discovers that her terrible grandmother is one to be pitied. My fear of her changed to pity. So, in other words, Vibanyo was conditioned and brought up to be a patriarchy seeking grand matriarch, and she knew no other alternative way. But we see in the admission of Leonor's mother when she tells her daughter, I'm amazed at your strength sometimes, Leonor. I can see that women are not weak, they just have a different strength, different from men. It is here that we're introduced to the new woman, and I'm just going to wind up here. The new woman who is not afraid to question set notions because Leonor is a questioning girl and a woman. She questions set notions and mindsets to derive or offer an alternative way of thinking. Even in Temsula Au's short stories, The Hills Called Home, in the stories The Jungle Major and Apenyo, in The Jungle Major, and in the last song we have characters like Katila and Apenyo who are very instrumental, representing defiance, representing voices, representing courage of a different sort altogether. So all of these writings, they show us that writing has created a niche for women whereby there is a validation of the potential they carry. Writing has become a powerful tool to visibilize and restore dignity to the lives and stories of women, and they are visiting and interrogating the codes, customs, and practices, declaring a reclamation of space and forging an identity of their own outside the contour and shadow of the men. And in doing so, they're also in turn rebuilding the Naga society in forward strides. Yes, thank you so much. I will end my paper there.
Thank you very much, Zamungi. And we have 5 more papers coming up. And so I would like to request the presenters to please keep your time between 8 to 10 minutes so that we have a little time for discussion. Okay, the second presenter is John Gaigamlung Gangmei, and he will be presenting on the topic Deathscapes in Borderland City, Negotiation in Social Change among the Rongmai tribe of Imphal. So Mr. John, please present your paper.
Yeah, good afternoon. Little hour. I hope you can see my print. I hope I'm audible also.
Yes, you are fine.
Hello, can you see the screen? Yeah. Yeah, I hope there may be some disturbance because the construction is going on out here and there. That is part of my paper also, where urbanization we are going to talk about and how rapid urbanization is also happening here in the place where I'm working. So to bring to the context, before that, I would like to appreciate and thank the NSA and all the people who have taken the effort to bring this moment to gather here and exchange the knowledge in that, though it is a short duration, but I believe that this will bring us further engagement to enlighten and to be more engaged and enhancing our knowledge and the understanding of our problem and issue. So as my topic says that deathscape in Borderland City, I'm here referring to the Imphal city that is in Manipur, particularly to the Rongmai tribe who has been there for centuries because of various historicity and the region. So therefore, just to bring to the context to so that where is this located? For example, here the state is divided because I think how much time we have, madam? I'm sorry because
Between
I was not
8
in the
to 10 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you. No problem. I shall try my best. We can see that how many of us are aware how the geographical segregation of the state, the plain and then the valley and the hill district. So just to give that idea, and then in the hill district we have a maximum of the tribals are out there of different ethnic groups, and then valley you have the dominant groups, the Meitei, followed by the Meitei Pangal, the Muslim, and of course some tribal groups. And in that particular district, in this, in the Imphal valleys, we have 65 villages. And then out of that, out of the 65, 24 of them are in the Imphal city, which we have visited seeing. And what is the city all about? And why are they here? That is the question. For instance, if you see the map, which I have taken from the Google Earth, you will see the core of the Manipur or the Meitei kingdom, we can say, or now the capital. So you have this Kangla and all the connectivity, the road. We have a colleague, Riley, also who have studied extensively on the road connectivity and infrastructure. So if we try to look at this map, we see that how this kind of nucleus or the mitochondria, how the energies or the state is controlled from this particular fort. And in this particular, in and around this fort, this community, the particularly the Rongmei are placed out there, Rongmei Nagas. So in that case, the Rongmei have, or the Rongmei, and there are Inpui villages also, and there are so many other tribes who are being placed out there, and they have seen different historical period from the stateless, then became into the state. They were absorbed as, and then you have a feudal monarch, and then of course the colonial and then post-colonial, and that is how we still have that. And in that context, during that period, they were put into service or in the life, as said, the life of servitude as a slave, or they were providing services in different form. Like, for example, in my particular village, I come from the Ragalong villages. We were made, when the post-independence, we were made to be what Safai Karamchari, or to clean the nice soil of the Assam Rifle, and we are in the cantonment area. So the villages which are surrounded in the Imphal city of the Rongmei village are assigned with different occupation, from tannery, from the rice pounding, from the supply of wood. And so there are different occupations. Based on that occupation, they were splitted all across the valleys to take care of granaries or to provide service to the British officer. And of course, even after the post-independence, our villagers, I have seen with my own eye how they have suffered and how we have fought continuously with the Assam Rifle to retain our land rights. So this is something which we have to, when we talk about the deathscape and how this community are coping. And with the rapid urbanization, if we see that, for example, just before going to that, we can see that how these people have been, and we had a monolith because we don't have much time. So we have a monolith and all, how these people were brought down and made to settles. And these are some of the evidence to show that, oh, and we have a cultures of this monolith where we erect in the commemorations of victory, in commemorations of our elders, or for the people who they have contributed to us, or the commemorations of the establishment of club, women's society, and so on. To go further, just to give you the idea that why this deathscape all about in the borderland city. If you see this slide, you will find, this is through my collection in my fieldwork, that this is part of my MPhil and PhD, which I'm doing, and I completed my MPhil in TIS and then undergoing my PhD in TIS Mumbai still. So this is some of the data which I found, that you can see the land bill, how the transitions of land. We were paying house tax, hill house tax, and the conditions of with the development, where you can see the how the district authority land acquisition. So you have a limited land space in that resources, and again the state wants some portion of the land, and the transition from that hill areas or the hill house tax to the land revenue, which is a separate in the hill areas. So you can see how urbanization has taken shape with through this picture. For instance, if we see here the urbanizations, the vertical growth we can witness. There is no more, hardly a few spaces. If you see that here in the another picture, in where there is no more courtyard, where our we have a common places, and there is in most of the community in this valley, you will find that hardly there will be a fencing around their boundary. So these places are used as a common place, though the property, because of the new land act, this fund, so revenue. So you have this individual land, clan land, that kind of thing have changes with time and spaces. And this is the challenge. For example, in these places where we can see a small portion of the ground left, that is a communal land where all can come. Otherwise, there is no more spaces, and there is no scope for horizontal growth, but except vertical growth. In that, we are seeing a disparity from the poorest of the poor to the elite group. So we have a different class of group, and that is what we are witnessing. And
Mr.
what is the issue
John,
with that?
I'm afraid I have to tell you to wrap up your presentation, please.
Oh, shit. Okay. Sorry, I'm just running. So I'll not be reading that. But if you see that in the Imphal War Cemetery, there are a war cemetery dedicated for those war, and then even for the Christian. I just want to run through. So this is a Christian cemetery, Imphal Christian cemetery, where the Christian can bury. But what about the people who are non-Christian? Particularly the indigenous, we have a TRC, we have TRK, and different others. So what is the problem with them, or what is the problem? For example, if you see the picture here, the courtyard burial, but due to the lack of space, we can see the growth. And this is a picture where the follower of TRK, the symbol, and then hypo, this one, the Babon Vishnu. And then if you see the unconventional way, I have witnessed that where they are burying. For example, in one of the Imphal city, this is a drainage actually, but they have to block drainage, and these belong to the landless people, wrong way, who could not afford to have a land. So they are burying even in the drainage, and that it is a roadside, which is what you call, the government have evicted, and they have taken for making a road. And in that place also you will find this kind of unconventional way of burial, because lack of land and space and urbanization. But when we come to the rural part, little bit, the changes is that they have a common burial place where they are fixing. This is something which we are observing. The PAI, the traditional institution, the PAI Kai or the village authority, and you can see, so they are in, because of there are challenges with Christianity, and for the Christian they have, but for what about them, where they will go? So the village authority and the like-minded people have taken up, and through this TRC and others, they have applied to the government. But in 1990, after a lot of persuasion, they got a land. However, with the oppositions of the other community, the Meitei community, beside, they are not allowed. And therefore, a lot of persuasion search went on, and they have to find a land in the nearby hill district that now is a Sardar, but earlier it was Senapati district. And this is the places which is 50 or approximately 14 kilometers away from the Imphal. And this is where now, and then the kind of condition we have, you can just observe. I'll just go through just to bring into the conclusion. Now they have realized that the need for this committee and to regulate the what you call the patterns of burial, so that there's scarcity of land. So this is one of the committee of the Kakulong villages, where this is very uncommon, and some kind of changes which we are observing. And you can see that how, like this Commonwealth Cemetery, they have organized and planned burial system, which is not a common practice or not in our practices. So there has been change to conserve or to the culture or the customary practices and the identity, and this is the space where they are fighting for. And with this, I think the Kokolong Committee Cemetery, now we have more than 10 villages. I came to know just last month that 15 villages have joined together and form a committee to regulate. And there are so many other community villages, small, which are very, what you call, economically backward, or the poor, villages, which doesn't have the status to purchase a common land. So there is a kind of negotiation going on, that how do we handle that? And to bring to the conclusion that this is something which is we are shifting, and however to conserve the identity and the customary practice, and this is what we are seeing some kind of changes. I think I should handle in the question and QA hour.
Okay,
so with that, I will thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. so sorry that we have only limited time for each
I understand,
presenter.
I understand.
Yes, and so we move to the third by Chantanglo Yantan, Colonialism and its Implications on Naga Women. So Ms. Chantanglo, please.
About this
Yeah.
issue, I think we can introduce
I
we
think
can move on to the other speaker just to
let's do
save
that.
time. Yeah.
We'll come back to you, Ms. Chantanglo. So we will go to Yihing Le. If you're around, can you present your paper on revisiting gendered roles in Zeliang tribal society in today's context? Yihing Le.
Hello. Yes, am I
Yes.
audible?
Yes, we can hear you,
Okay.
but we can't see you.
Okay.
Is your video on?
Okay, please wait. Okay, can you see me now?
No. We know you are here, but we can't see your
Uh,
face. Okay, you're visible now and audible
okay,
as
I
well.
have turned on
Please.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Okay, thank you, NVC team for this opportunity and respected our chair. Um, the title for my presentation is Revisiting Gendered Roles in the Zeliang Tribal Society in Today's Context. However, I have made some few changes and reframed it as revisiting gendered roles in contemporary Zeliang community. So I was first introduced to the Naga literature on gender inequality and injustice in the Naga society through the semi-autobiographical work, A Terrible Matriarchy by the Naga poet and author Esterin Kire. This book is significant for me because it brings in the experiences of Naga women, which explains why women are what they are. And I feel this is necessary to, along with other conventional approaches in studying our social system. Out of the many important aspects about this novel, in its own unique way, it sets the tone of gender norms and gendered roles that operates in the private domain. The novel presents a picture of women and the ways through which they operate in the presence, as well as absence of a patriarchal male figure within the institution of family. And it also highlights the social reality where women can be indirect partakers of subjection as against their own gender. So these all operate under the social construct of patriarchy. This paper is generally an attempt to examine how patriarchy as an overbearing and norm-setting ideology is capable of turning each member of its society, even women, into an agent. I will do this by bringing out the lived experiences of few women whom I interviewed from the community. These experiences are invoked as a way of seeking answers for why gender roles continue and who perpetuate such practices by questioning women's complicity when they exercise their roles as mothers, mother-in-laws, stepmother, grandmothers, or any woman who act as a guardian of a child. And they are exhibited in the form of deliberate withdrawal or direct and indirect participation in the process of male domination, oppression, and exploitation of women. The Zeliang tribal community, as many other hill tribes in the northeast India, functions according to established traditions, conventions, and values. Land is still the determining factor in formation of lineage, history, and identity, including resource entitlements and rights of the people. So such close association with land also greatly influence the expanse of control of traditional institutions, customary laws, and societal norms. So although our social relations have undergone many changes with the inception of modernity, modern education, and Christianity, it is pertinent to consider whether these changes have been useful in mitigating norms that derogates the value and being of women. This question is true for Ziliang community because even today women still struggle to move beyond the domain of caregiving, reproduction, and submission to the authority of men. For any violation of roles attributed to women, it is also seen that often women themselves would engage in criminalizing women. It is also true that there is power dynamism in the way senior women enjoy high handed control over young women younger women in an attempt to preserve male domination. So there is this lady whom I name her as Grace, whose childhood experiences as a female child was replete with unequal opportunities in comparison with her brothers. She was sent to to a government school when she was a young girl, when her brothers were sent to private schools. And even when she wanted to pursue her further studies, she was made to give up this dream on the pretext that the family do not have enough financial resources to support her, which was not the same case with her brothers. Through this particular event, it was observed that her disappointments were mostly directed towards her father. She did not realize the importance or existence of her mother's role as a woman or as her own mother. As the story unfolded, it was also learned that her mother sparsely spoke on her behalf. Had the mother vouched for her daughter's right to education and equal opportunities, um, even in the absence of equal opportunities, the whole narrative would have been different. The second instance is that of another woman whom I have called her Helen, who attempted to gain authority over the household by manipulating the situation of her stepchildren. Since her stepchildren belonged to the first wife, they were seen as a threat to her position and the inheritance rights and entitlements of her own male children. These stepchildren were mistreated to secure entitlements of her own children, like um, breaking the emotional bond between the father and the children of his first wife, reducing the children to forced labor, and treating them with verbal and domestic abuse, and even to the extent of restricting them from offering their hands in marriage when it was time to do so. All these deeply affected their psyche as a child. As a result, it became a normal lifestyle of some sort, even after they became adults. Such experience is visible and directly encountered in the Naga society as well, which we don't
Excuse
openly
me,
acknowledge and
Miss Yihing
address.
Lie. Can I
Yes,
request you
ma'am.
to wrap up,
Yeah.
please?
Okay, I will give some few key observations. From these experiences, it is through mundane things, mostly in the private domain, and interactions within this space, that Naga women construct their social reality about marriage, institutions, education, gendered roles, social taboos attached to women, etc.
I think the microphone is gone. Miss Yihing Lie?
Yes, can you hear
Yeah,
me?
you're back now.
Yeah, sorry, there's some network problem here in my place.
Okay, then
Okay,
shall we go to the next paper, or you would like
can,
to wrap up in a sentence?
yeah, can you please give me 1 minute? I'll
Okay,
just
sure.
wrap up.
All right.
Yeah. So, um, while it is men who appropriate and distribute the roles of women and men, it is seen that women play a big part in establishing and maintaining such distribution of roles. And this is informed by the narratives of young married women in the Naga community. And um, okay, all right. So regarding this high-handedness of women, we see it in when instances of fixing marriages, in the instances of disciplining young women, etc., where uh, mm, elder women or senior women members in the family enjoy some certain powers, um, which is distinct from women in general. So, in conclusion, I would like to say that this okay, uh, I believe gendered roles is a trend that perpetuates subordination of women in Naga society till today, and this process is shaped and nurtured in the private domain, especially under the constant guardianship of a maternal figure in Naga society. And it is pertinent that Naga women are often considered subordinate
Okay, I think our network has gone again. So I think I will give the time to Ms. Chumtanglo. Can you unmute yourself and present your paper? And thank you very much. Yihing
Oh,
Lei, if you can hear us. We're moving to the next paper.
oh, okay. Hello.
Hi. Hello. Am I good to
Okay,
go?
Yes, please. Yes, Ms. Chumtanglo.
Um, am I heard?
Yes,
Just
yes,
want to
we
make
can hear
sure.
you.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Chair, for the time and NSA for this wonderful opportunity. Well, I'm presenting on the topic colonialism and its implication on Naga women. This presentation is an attempt to critically look at the early written colonial accounts on Naga women and also examine some of the colonial writings which was reproduced by the contemporary scholars. So, though colonial accounts on Naga women are scarce and lack comprehensive view, the little information provided by the colonial writings left its deep colonial legacy. So before coming to the main focus of this paper, I would like to just give a little sense of the background of colonial history in Naga Hills in order to highlight how colonial ethnography work is linked with colonial project. And as most scholar claims it, Naga was a stateless society, and in the process, um, uh, in the process of reorganizing the stateless society into communities, ethnic groups, tribes, etc., the colonial activities involve inventing many concepts, ideologies, classification, and constructed different categories. In such process, the category tribe ascribed to Naga group as observed by contemporary scholar is therefore a colonial construct. So aligning with this observation, my observation is that colonial representation on Naga women forms a distinct category as of having a tribal status. For the colonial, Naga women were often categorized into tribal women, which is used to mark a distinction from the other Indian women. Subsequently, one of the classic representation made by the colonial anthropologists on the tribal Naga women is that women from this region enjoys relatively high status from their counterpart Indian women because of the casteless and classless-based society. This is seen in the colonial writings expressed in their monographs. For instance, Hutton shows that status of tribal women in Naga society is high, even though they are not free from the influence of traditional tribal laws. Um, uh, the JP Mills also expressed that women are satisfied with their position and status under the adequate protection and care from men. So there are many instances, but I'll just limit to that for now. And this notion of Naga women having high status expressed in the colonial monographs sort of reproduced in post-colonial discourses. Therefore, central to this theme, this paper highlights how this notion is built on colonial idea. And I argue that such perceived idea produced by the colonial writers undermines the real existing issues facing Naga women. And the post-colonial discourses not only inform and shape post-colonial discourses on Naga women, but rather it has become a characteristic in defining contemporary women's status in Nagaland, which often conflate Naga women's status with that of Indian women's status. And I find this notion of Naga women having high status very problematic because past colonial discourses on Naga women of pre-colonial and colonial era have become a dominant theme in post-colonial discourse. Especially this observation is mostly made from the outsider view, how tribal women are different from other Indian women. There are many sources on this, but I will not dwell much on this. So if we check the ground reality on the status of Naga women, it highlights a contradictory picture. At this juncture, one needs to engage and take into an account to see what constitute high status of women. In an advanced country, high status of women indicates overall well-being in terms of education, health, right to choose, access to power and resources, so on and so forth. So we need to consider all these dimensions to fit into this high status category. So in the context of Naga society, for many years, women were invisibilized, discriminated under patriarchal system, and suffered state hegemonic violence perpetrated by the Indian army. And women have a long history of subjugation in matters relating to access to power, rights, justice, and of course, we also have a colonized history. So considering all this, it's important to know that women are not a homogeneous group, and therefore we need to start engaging with our real issues. So in one way, this paper is an attempt to debunk the myth of the misrepresentation on Naga women as having a high status. But I'm also interested to go back to the colonial era, because having a colonized history in Naga society, we cannot ignore the implication it has on Naga women. So according to my observation, our present issues is an inherent issue of the past, and we have not yet resolved it pertaining to women issues or say gender issues. As Foucault points out, how our past present is the genealogy of the past, how our present is the genealogy of the past. And he further discusses how the history of the present deploys genealogy inquiry and the uncovering of hidden conflicts and contexts as a means of revaluing the value of contemporary phenomena. This is cited by Carlin. So in this context, I feel it was important for me to look at what kind of history does Naga women have. As Carlin points out, what is a history of our present? My paper is just confined to colonial area, but I will not go in detail the trajectory of colonial rule in Naga Hill, but I will just briefly discuss the colonial implication on Naga women. So when colonial
Miss
administration
Chuntamlo,
was established in Naga Hill.
I have to warn you that you have a minute to wrap up your paper, please. Thank you.
Oh, okay. I'm just wrapping up. Yeah. So when colonial administration was established in Naga Hills, Naga traditional institutions like the village parties were integrated and subsumed into colonial administration. And these traditional institutions was strengthened and emerged as a male privileging institution. Colonial rule towards a state-making mission introduced new form of social order, which also introduced new gendered order. Gendered order was structured by the colonial administration to promote masculine ideals and norms. For instance, the chief or the head of the villages, who were basically male, were officially recognized and endowed with decision-making power, which eventually created a regime of male power. And the colonial administration has monopolized the administrative system by rendering only male members to exercise power, whereas on the other hand, colonial power introduced a suppressing factor for women that endowed women to a disadvantaged position. Such arrangement made by the colonial administration became a source of women discrimination. So in this process, gender hierarchy was created in the context of colonial role as an administrator in the state-making processes, which essentially produced women as subservient to men's position. According to Dasgupta, colonialism itself was a highly gender process, which was driven by a gender force of discrimination. Hierarchical relations are reflected in the relationship between colonizer and colonized, which gender system was imposed through hierarchical relationship between men and women. Um, so a male member in Naga society, which was empowered by colonial administration politically or even economically for that matter, started interpreting our traditional laws. In my argument, I would say that the gender hierarchies which we have in our traditional system itself is a colonial product. So the idea that restriction imposed on women in terms of decision-making, leadership role, access to power, etc., is because of the colonial arrangement in the past in Naga society. So colonial discourses and practice have sort of produced a complex picture of Naga women, and the effect of colonialism is very much reflected in the contemporary understanding of women's status in Nagaland.
Yes.
So just my concluding remark, I'm sorry, so patriarchy may have existed or prevailed even during pre-colonial time, but it got reenacted or reinforced with the creation of new social order via the creation of colonial administration. And I would also like to mention, like Professor Ziol, when she talked about like how the women from the Chakasang and Tangkul community played the role of an ambassador to resolve conflict in the past, but this role is diminished and have been limited. So we need to rediscover our traditional values that recognize a women's role, and our traditional values which uphold the ideals and principle of treating women with respect and honor. And the fact that restriction imposed on women access to, power, rights, justice is very much against the principle of our traditional values. So this presentation is also a message to the traditional stakeholders that we, the women, the younger generation, will continue to bargain our rights. So in that way, we are also rewriting our history, even in the midst of our political structures, so that our voice
Yes.
will echo in the next generation. So thank you.
Thank you
Thank you
very
so much.
much. Yes, thank you, Ms. Chantanglo. And then very quickly, we will go to the fifth paper, Resistance Through Third Space Consciousness, a study of women's short stories of Nagaland by Ivy Roy Sarkar. Miss Ivy, are you around? Mr. Muru, can you locate?
Yeah,
Miss
so
Ivy?
yeah, while we try to get in touch with her, if the next speaker is around, maybe we can give the time to the next speaker as we
Okay,
try to get in touch with Ivy.
okay, let's do that. So Miss Sujata, are you around here? Your paper on paradoxes of democracy and question of women representation in Nagaland. Miss Sujata. Are they both not around? Mr. Muru, are you able to also locate Sujata?
We're still doing that.
Okay,
Just a minute.
So two of them, Miss Ivy and Miss Sujata as well. Okay, then while we wait for them, maybe we will take some questions that have already come so that we can save some time. As you can see in the chat box, there are two questions that have come. First for Nzan Mungi, and this questions comes from Professor Wati Longcha, and he has very rightly pointed out that Naga women has not adequately challenged the dominant male power construct of historiography. What do you have to say about that? He's asking a question, but I think it is in the affirmative, right? Women have not adequately challenged. So what do you have to say about it?
Yes, so I think I'd like to respond back with another question. What is adequate really? How do you define the discourse of power? Now, if we go by Foucault's definition, power is knowledge, or rather, power is based on knowledge, and power is to make use of knowledge. Now, when I look at these women writers and the Naga scholars, Naga women scholars of contemporary times, writing stories, it may be just a novel, it may be a collection of poetry, it may just be a collection, an anthology of folk tales. But in their writing in itself, I think there is a strong statement going out of where they are letting their visibility be felt. And I think with visibility, that's the visibility starts a negotiation of the power discourse. And I'm just going to use a very easy and probably also a little silly and straightforward example. But a few years back, I had published this collection of folk tales which were translated from the Lotha Naga tongue, which is my mother tongue. And in the blurb, one of the scholars who had written for the blurb, Dr. Paul Pimomo, and I'm quoting directly from him, he says that this is an important pioneering work because it is by Lotha woman, and given the fact that the official role of village storyteller was traditionally reserved for men, the book's female authorship can be taken as an unintended ironic spin on the tradition, as well as a marker of the welcome changes that have occurred in modern Lotha society. Of course, this comment and blurb is written just in context of that book and how I've used these stories as a way of appropriating a space which was formerly ascribed only for, like, at least in a lot of Lotha villages, for the male members of the family, or certain chosen male leaders, so on and so forth. So in these emergence of writings, I see that there is definitely a new negotiation of power going on. And I cannot answer whether women have adequately challenged or not, but I can definitely respond and say that women are definitely, responding through their works and creating a new discourse on power altogether. I hope that I have been able to, answer at least a certain portion of the question that you had in mind.
Thank you so much. And is either Ivy or Sujata around now?
Chair, it seems like they are yet to get back to us.
Oh, I
So
see. I
I
see.
think if that doesn't happen within a couple of minutes, we'll have this Q&A and then wrap the session up.
Okay, so we will continue with the questions. And the second question is for Yi Hingley again, and this comes from Mr. Samson Kamai, and he is of the opinion that Christianity, or he is quoting another author that who opines that Christianity is found to be adapted into patriarchal settings in tribal settings. In other words, he thinks that Christianity is unable to challenge the inheritance rights of tribal women. And so, would you like to comment on that? Miss
Okay.
Ying-Lei?
Yes, am I audible?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So I think from my own experience, Christianity has actually awakened the tribal communities to the idea of justice and inequality in our region. And this is evident from my own experience, like from my own family, like my even if we are still under the garb of patriarchy, and I cannot say for every layers of patriarchy that is operating in our society, but in the case of inheritance rights, um, within my own family, like my parents have reserved property, like a land property for me as well. So I think it is I'm we still have a long way to go, but I do not agree with law that that Christianity is, it has adopted with the patriarchal settings, but instead, I think if we look at the positive side, I mean it has contributed more towards eradicating patriarchy in our society, and especially with aspects to inheritance rights. This is from my own experience. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ying-Lei. I think that to an extent is right, in a sense that when it comes to private properties, the parents are, they have the freedom to bequeath any property to their children. But when it comes to landed and ancestral property, I think there is truth in that Christianity has not been able to change that fact, because I do not think that it has happened in tribal society that the ancestral land has been passed on to daughters. Of course, there are exceptions, like in the case of the Angamis and also the Chakisang, especially among the Kesha Kuja speaking group, where some properties pass on from the mothers to the daughters. That is an exception. So I think good points coming from both sides. I think it keeps us thinking about the impact of Christianity on our realities as well. And I think Ms. Nzamungi, you can keep on thinking about this while we take other questions, because there is also another question for you by Mr. Samson Kamai, and he says that there seems to be a lack of historical sensitivity in the analysis of Naga women writers. And this, he talks vis-a-vis the gendered roles. And he's also referring to the book, which you have also cited, A Terrible Matriarchy. And so you can think about your response while we take as another question. And this question is directed to Mr. John. And Mr. Samson Kama is asking you to expound the present political power sharing pattern in Manipur in the light of your paper. So if you could please do that, I will give the time to you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Samson. When we talk about the power sharing and the collective bargaining in context of the valley, as I have said that in that kind of this collective bargaining, the Rongmai in particular doesn't have much, because as we know that in the when we talk about the in the state assembly we have 19 ST, and that most of them are from the hill district and none from the valley. So if you try to see the equation, as I have said, that how this community, when the land was given after a lot of persuasions, and despite they are being there for centuries, in 1998, when the land was given by the government, I mean, not exactly 5 hectares of land was given for a burial spot, but they were not given land right. But that, in that also, the dominant community who was nearby to that, this land was beside the Christian cemetery. Despite of that, the dominant community could negate and then the decision of the government. In that way, when we talk about the political power equation, they doesn't have, and these tribals cannot afford to represent it by themselves. When I say that by themselves, mean by Rongmai or any tribal, because they are divided in such a way, the constituency are divided in such a way that they will not be, even if they put up a party, I mean, a candidate, they will never win. Professor Gamamai formerly have tried, but he lost by a margin. And after that, we have seen in the case of Imphal that how the Thangmaiban constituency was splitted, and then the Langol, that for example, Lemonai, which is part of, now it's in the Kangpokpi district, which is a more hill, which is inside the Imphal Valley. But that particular village is this Rongmai and then tribal are part of the other hill district. So this is an irony which we have. And therefore, I think when we talk about the negotiation process, I think we are far behind in that way. Thank you very much. I think I did justice to the question. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Chair.
thank you, Mr. John. And there are also a few questions which I think we can take up. I think this is directed to Ms. Chimtanglo. And in her paper itself, the question that is put forth by Dr. Puko Stephen, I think she has answered to an extent what is the impact of colonialism on the present Naga women. But if you want to prop some more, Ms. Chimtanglo can take up that again and be more specific. And also the second question, again to Ms. Chimtanglo, is apart from the Western colonialism, the BJP Hindutva ideology is a major challenge, and it is a systematic social colonization of the Nagas in particular, and maybe the tribals in general. So what do you have to say about that phenomenon? Ms. Chimtanglo?
Hi. um, Hi. Thank you for the.
Okay, I think we have lost her again. Have we? All right, then maybe we'll come back to you, Ms. Nzamungi. Would you like to address the question?
Yes, yeah, it was written Yantan, so that's why I hadn't looked at the question, yeah. But probably, yes, it's directed to me. So I think that my reading of the terrible matriarchy may be a little different from the reading of the gentleman Samson Kame, because when he uses the term, he says here that Isserine seems to be subtly averting from patriarchy, something of that sort that I had come across. Yeah, that Kire very subtly averted patriarchy, ascribed as an inherent feature. I actually read it in a different way. I don't read it as a subtle aversion, but rather a subtle juxtaposition. Because on one hand, we have the grandmother figure, and we're explained why the grandmother is a matriarch and how she has been conditioned in that context to, like look at only the male as an important entity, and so she indirectly becomes also, somebody who continues the vicious cycle of patriarchy. But on the other hand, remember that we also in Dileño have, the other polar character of a girl who questions why, only boys and men should be considered important, and why am I lesser important just because I'm born this way, so on and so forth. So she seemed to be very, very, in a sense, determined, headstrong, very she seems to be very bold with her questions, in fact, yeah, subverting the idea of patriarchy as she continues to question the grandmother and the way that she was. So, in fact, I don't know whether I'm answering this question, Mr. Kamwe, but for me, I read Isrin's terrible matriarchy, in fact, as a way in which she has juxtaposed two different kinds of women. And in that, I think he has not actually, she has not actually accepted, or rather, celebrated patriarchy as something very normalized within Naga society, but rather that we really need to question the way that patriarchy has, patriarchy has hegemonized, a social space. So that's how what I would like to respond to what you're saying. That
Yeah.
my interpretation is different from yours.
Mm. Thank you very much, Mrs. Zamungi. And Ms. Sujata has joined us. And so, Ms. Sujata, if you are here, can you take the time to present your paper? And you have 8 minutes. I think you need to unmute. No, we can't hear you. Yeah, you are muted.
The present condition of
The host, please.
Yes.
Can you unmute Ms.
Unmute.
Sujata? She's still muted.
the current condition.
So while we're working on the audio issue, do you think we can listen to Ms. Chimkanlo with those two questions that were sent earlier? Oh, yeah, Sujata is back. Okay,
Thank you, ma'am.
back to you.
Yeah, the paper, my title is like Paradoxes of Democracy and the Question of Women Representation in Nagaland. So if I go like why I have developed this paper, if we look back, actually in the month of February in 2017, a protest were triggered after the Nagaland statement government announced the polls for urban local bodies with a provision to reserve 33% seats for women. So various groups, including apex bodies of the tribals
So,
called
in my
Hovos,
a simple way of answering your question,
have
gender
opposed the
hierarchy,
government's decision to
gender
reserve.
hierarchy in Naga society was created during colonial administration.
Hello.
Yes, Ms. Sujata, you can go on.
Yeah, is it? Yeah. So oppose the government's decision to reserve seats for women, calling it an infringement upon Naga society and its traditions and customs as it protected under Article 371 of the Constitution. Situation got worse, and 2 people died in the protest when people marched towards Chief Minister's residence in Dimapur. So angry mobs actually vandalized the offices of election commission, deputy commissioner, even the CM's residence also. So this was the background of my study and how like how in a democracy the representation of diverse groups and communities enriches the essence of democratic values. So here in case of Nagaland, despite having a good gender indicators, the women's are like having a negligence presence in legislative assemblies as well as in parliamentary institutions also. So therefore the one of the precondition of democracy is modernization. According to Lipset, the factors of industrialization, urbanization, literacy rate, employment, and education, wealth are the factors that subsumed under economic development, and these actually correlate with democracy. So modernization and democracy actually going hand by hand in a society. So Lipset's modernization theory drew a connection between micro level modernization and macro level democracy. Again, Lerner, who has also identified urbanization, then education and communication are the core factors in the process of individual modernization and political participation. So in some economic development, then again wealth, education, according to even Huntington, also economic development increases political mobilization. Therefore, it can be said that Lerner, Lipset, and to some extent Huntington also, like they were of the view that socioeconomic development, education are the prerequisite for a political democracy. But here the question arises, does the modernization and the lead to the democratic participation of women in a polity? What does the urban body election in Nagaland reflect? Despite having a good status in terms of women education educational development and other development indicators, there is a negligent presence of women in Nagaland State Assembly. So the study explores the issues of political representation of women in the representative institutions in Nagaland. However, the state initiated mechanism protect the culture of Naga society in the form of Article 371A has depend the internal restrictions through traditional practices for women within the Naga society. These are the existential tensions in a liberal and accommodative state. Then states are also reproducing injustice inherent in the society in the form of traditional norms and laws. So the study understands the question of gender and politics in the context of Naga society, why there is a negligence presence of women in political representation. The study also explores how the representative institutions exclude representation of a marginalized groups. So therefore, how does that non-interference or non-domination of a state actually lead to the domination in the other form towards a vulnerable section of the society? So the existing scholarship actually suggests that despite having a good significant progress in education, employment, and health sectors, women in the world have a negligence presence. Therefore, there is a democratic deficit in terms of political representation from in a political sphere. The political sphere in India also, though the 73rd and 74th Amendment of 1993 introduced the panchayats and municipalities in the constitution, reserved 1/3 of seats for women in these bodies. However, the tribal society standing at the margin is not able to fulfill this kind of the local governance system's essence. So tribal women's exclusion from politics not only isolates from management of community affairs, it also restricts their ability to gain access to the modern system of democracy. This explains almost complete absence of women from constitutional bodies under local governance. While the women's movement in India making a gradual retreat from its prediction, but it remains largely centrist in its orientation. This in part explains why, despite countrywide reservation given to the women in the system of local governance, in tribal states of Northeast India continue to be denied to this privilege. It is significant to note that while the women's movement in the country has already entered in the second phase of campaign, in its struggle for political representation, there is hardly a murmur protest against the denial of political rights of tribal women. Despite taking some efforts from various women's organizations, their efforts are remain segmental, primarily restricted to the welfare issues without challenging the institutional basis for their subordinate position. So while developing and developed countries, including the mainland India, made an effort to secure greater presence of women in the legislative and executive bodies, women in Nagaland continue to be largely invisible in the elected offices. Though there is a reservation of 25% seats in the management of village development board since 1980, but there is not a single woman is there. That during this period, women's voter participation stands at 78.3%, which is just 0.2% below in the turnout of male voters. Uh, Interestingly, women exceeded men's electoral participation in the 8 of 12 assembly elections held so far. This is the puzzling given that Nagaland is one of the most progressive states of India in terms of gender indicators. Despite having good gender indicators, Nagaland has a negligent presence of women representation in the assembly election. In the state of Nagaland, firstly, the women have a negligent presence in the legislative body. Secondly, despite having a favorable attitude towards like giving representation in the urban local bodies, that this does not actually lead to the implementation of the reservation policy. These paradoxes reflect the position of women in the decision making process in the state. Therefore, it can be seen that though there is a higher level of socio-economic and educational development that accompanied modernization, does not necessarily translate into the democratic participation of women and gender justice in Nagaland. Therefore, it can be said that in Nagaland, the modernization is unable to lead towards democratic participation of women. It is assumed in the existing literature that higher level of educational development and modernization has its impact on the larger democratic participation, but Nagaland shows the other picture of democracy in terms of gender justice. Uh, the British administration actually played an important role in spreading Christianity in Naga Hills. Along with the Christianity, churches also play an important role in the Naga tribal society. Virginius Kaka, who actually pointed out the conversion to Christianity resulted in positive as well as negative consequences to women in tribal society. For example, it opened space for tribal women to to get access to education and for a job to get access to education in tribal societies. Along with this, it also introduced a variety of restrictions in the name of ethics in the law and the laws of the church, which go against the kind of freedom that tribal women enjoy in traditional social setup. Thus, Christianity actually has led to a number of restrictions on the kinds of freedom that tribal women traditionally enjoyed. Amir argues that Christianity brought a new pattern of gendered socialization in the church and Naga public sphere constituted by the educated middle class. So the role of Christianity can be both liberating as well as constraining. On the other hand, it liberates both the women and men to have equal access to education. On the other hand, it reproduces social conservatism and enframes the patriarchal norms and values. So,
Ms. Sujata, I will have to request you to please wrap up your paper.
Yeah. When we come to the Article 371A, there exists a tension in claiming equality. When it got an institutionalized form, it actually denies the rights of women in the name of legitimized traditional practice. So the cultural membership in a community hinders the basic rights of a minority within that community. Spinner Halef, in a Feminism, Multiculturalism, and Oppression and the State, states that group autonomy can harm women. So Okin also argues that in providing group rights, the inequalities within the pertinent groups should be given special attention so that they are, because they are less public than the other inequalities. The policies responding to the needs and claims of more patriarchal cultural groups in less patriarchal liberal society must ensure the participation of or representation of less powerful members of such groups, including women in such negotiation. Therefore, the contemporary scenario has been like given a chance to the Naga culture and tradition to think about their practices, and once again, so that the presence of women in the public engagement, because and as and Philip also suggested, for a fair representation, the politics of presence should always come up with the politics of ideas. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sujata. And I don't know if Ms. Ivy is here or even if we have enough time for her. Mr. Nguru, what do you say about?
Well, I think I don't think Ivy is available.
Okay.
So given that we have a good number of questions, we can have 10 minutes or so for the Q&A.
All right. So we get an addition of 3 minutes. So which is a good thing. Then let us take some of the questions that were put forth. Before Sujata came, there were two questions for Ms. Chumtanglo. Would you like to respond to that? And after that, we will come back to one question which is directed to Nzamungi and Yihingle by Rimi Thadu. And I think she wants you to engage in a conversation with each other in the light of Esther and Kire's terrible matriarchy. So the question is, how do you converse with each other in your reading of the terrible matriarchy through your respective papers? So I think you don't need me now. Both of you can take over when you start that conversation. But first of all, we will give the time to Ms. Chumtanglo. Ms. Chumtanglo, are you around?
Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'll just briefly answer the first question. So I have mentioned in my paper, gender hierarchy is a legacy of colonial administration, and I have looked at how the village party, were sort of integrated and subsumed into colonial administration during the time of colonial rule in Naga society. And this sort of traditional institution was sort of strengthened and emerged as a male privileging institution. And these people who were sort of endowed to interpret our own traditional laws, they were given the authority to interpret our own traditional and customary laws. So I would say that the present condition of Naga women in the current traditional arrangement that bars women, that bars women to access rights, equality, is an impact of colonialism. That I would say.
Okay. What about the question on the Hindutva ideology?
Hello. Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
So I think again to briefly answer, I think we need to be careful of the way how Hindutva ideology is penetrating in our society via educational institution and through cultural integration, and that is again one way of colonizing our society. And I think in my observation, they're also adopting the model of Christian missionaries, how they sort of establish schools and institutions in different areas. So in that way, they're also trying to penetrate in our society by replicating this model of Christian missionaries. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. There is a conversation happening between Ms. Lulu and Professor Wati, and so we will not address that. We will leave that to the two of them. But if Ms. Chumtanglo would like to get into that conversation, you may please raise your hand and we will give the time to respond. So in the meantime, I will give the time to both Nzamungi and Yihingle.
Okay, so I'll start with a quotation direct from the text of Terrible Metraki, the admission of the mother of Lieno here. And I think these are very powerful words. The daughter of Vibanyo and the mother of Lieno, she tells her daughter, I'm amazed at your strength sometimes. I probably read it earlier, but it was in a hurry. I just want to reiterate it with a reason. I am amazed at your strength sometimes, Lieno. I can see that women are not weak. They just have a strength different from man. And read this in the light of the earlier statements that the grandmother Vibanyo had made, where she used words like the station of life for a girl is at home. And I quote again, these are directly from the text. Girls were weak and not as good as boys. So these both are citations from the text itself. And it is in the very powerful words which have been uttered by Lino's mother, that I would like to, bring to the audience that if there was a female patriarch, and I'm talking about, grandmother as a kind of patriarch because she's an extension of patriarchy after all. So if there was a female patriarch, there was also a female questioning and being an active agent of change, outside the umbrella of patriarchy. In fact, she was questioning the umbrella of patriarchy. So the thing, one thing is that we need to make the yardstick, I think, more flexible and accommodative, and looking at femininity and patriarchy, not just from a fixed, perspective, but from a dynamic perspective. I think that is where we will get the responses of the question of whether or not we see women being active agents here in the text or not, because we see that there are two different kinds of active agents: the grandmother as an active, like a patriarch, and Leonor as somebody who is opposing that patriarchy and questioning, and questioning and trying to redefine the set gender norms and spaces that were ascribed. I have tried, to respond. I hope that answers, the question that the guy put up.
Thank you, ma'am, and then also to Ma'am Rimi for the question. I also agree with Ma'am Paton, and actually this text, this literature by Estherine Kire introduced me, like I said in the beginning, to gender inequality and injustice, and how women also play a very big part as an agent in perpetuating it. And this I failed to mention this in my presentation due to time constraint, but in one of the experiences, like of the interviews that I documented, there was this woman who okay, sorry, please wait a second. Okay, so I feel I was going to give this observation. I'll just read it out now, so that how this book led me to give certain observation, a sense of direction to this experience of this woman. It is it is possible to replicate and impose the same subjective practices one had experienced in the past life on the present social relations. And I think this was evident in the life of Vibanyo, the grandmother of Delano. And such experiences can also shape one's thought process, transforming it into hatred, anger, and even a violent worldview. And it often leads to criminalization or even demonization of women, like in the extreme sense, especially when it comes to the case of rape, adultery, substance abuse of the partner, premarital pregnancy, etc. So I think from this reading gave me a perspective about how women as a patriarch have construct their worldview. And I think I don't have much I don't have any difference for that matter with Mem Paton, and I guess I think our reading is on the same line. Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, both Zamungi and Yihingde. I think just to push us further, we have been permitted to go until 3:40, so we have about 3 or 4 minutes. Just want to probe a little bit further, because we have been referring to the terrible matriarchy. I wish we could hear it from the horse's own mouth, but maybe the two of you can enlighten us. I'm just wondering whether the author was, writing this book and taking the socialization of gender as an essential part, or was she really challenging the socialization of gender? Because the reason I ask this is just by looking at the title itself, Terrible Matriarchy, she calls that text. And so I'm just wondering, are we reading too much into it, or was it that the author really intended to challenge the existing socialization of gender? Since both of you are very well versed in that reading. I think you can comment if you would like to.
See, for me, since although the titular figure of the grandmother was obviously like the main protagonist in the text, but along with that protagonist of the grandmother, we also have the granddaughter who stands in direct opposition with her ideas and her ideals and dares to challenge her. So, therein, I don't know what Easterine actually intended per se, but I would like to read it as her way of challenging the existing patriarchal norms, and along with it the other kind of the other discriminatory practices and customs that have come along with it, whether it be the property and inheritance, like inheritance rights, because that's specifically the reason, one of the main backdrop to why the grandmother figure becomes a patriarch in herself as well. So for me, that is the way that I read it, that it's a challenge, because had that not been the intention, then I don't think that we would have been able to look at Dileño as a kind of heroine figure, but she does manage to, emerge as a heroine figure in the text. And that's what leads me to also understand this text as a kind of questioning and inquisition into, the stratification and the gender binaries and the discrimination of gender within the Naga societal space. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate the amazing insights from all the 6 speakers and also very, very instructive perspectives. So on my own behalf, I would like to say thank you to Ms. Nzamunye and also Mr. John, Ms. Chumtenglo, Ms. Yihingle, and also Ms. Sujata. I appreciate all your hard work, and I think it takes a lot of courage, to present your perspectives in front of the world. And so I really appreciate it, and thank you very much. And thank you to the NSA for this opportunity to chair this session. And with this, I think I will end my time. Back to you, Mr. Ngoru, the session organizer. Thank you to you as well, Mr. Ngoru.
All right. So on behalf of the NSA and the organizing committee, a few words of appreciation to all those participants who are involved in this particular session. And I extend my gratitude to Dr. Ian Binney for her time and in chairing this particular session on a critical issue which is quite kind of attracting attention in the contemporary time. And also to all the speakers who have given their insights into the very issue. And I must apologize to Yehin Le. I think unwittingly I missed out her name when I introduced the speakers in the beginning of the session. And the thanks to all the participants. So a few words from my side, apart from the word of thanks concerning this particular topic that we're discussing. I think this particular gender question within the Naga society has attracted interest, not just from the scholars board within Naga society and others, but it has also increasingly attracted the interest from the post-colonial state. And also the cultural forces, not just within the Naga society, but even from elsewhere, as we have observed in the chat box. So I think the question that maybe what confronts us, especially the scholars working under this on this theme, is to how do we now what would be the Naga women's theory about gender against this very invested ideological field, right? I think that's a very critical actually question one has to which the scholars have to keep in mind. Because the gender question is not something happening in the vacuum. There's a deeply ideological field which is investing in this particular question as well. So with that few words, I'll close the session, and we reconvene at 4 o'clock, and we have 2 sessions taking place at the same time. There's a parallel session, and one is on diaspora and globalization, and the other is on orality, tradition, and culture. So thank you, everyone, and see you at 4 o'clock.